Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast. Ozcast. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
It was a time when pro wrestling was a pop culture phenomenon.
Talk about your Psalms. Talk about John 3:16. Austin 3:16 says, I just whipped your ass.
Pay-per-view quality matches live on free TV every Monday night.
Monday, July 6th, 1998. Goldberg captured the gold. Goldberg, at age 31, is the heavyweight champion of the world.
We look back at the battle between WCW Monday Nitro and WWF Monday Night Raw.
It's me, Austin!
Oh, son of a bitch!
What? It's me, Austin! It was me all along, Austin!
This is Reliving the War with Simon Takla and Nims Azoor.
You can call this the New World Order of Wrestling, brother.
Welcome to Reliving the War. This is a brand new project started by myself and Simon Takla. You might remember us from the wide world of wrestling. Speaking of the great man Simon Takla, he joins me via Zoom as we are doing this socially distanced.
Yeah, that's it. And I'm so excited to be here. I'm so excited to go back in time and take a look at the wrestling we all grew up on, see if it holds up, you know, see what we were thinking as kids. I think it's going to be fun. It's going to take a long time, but thank you for joining us at the start of the journey.
We're going to, for those that just want to read the blurb of what Reliving the War is, we're going to look back at the Attitude Era. As you heard in the intro, it was a time where pro wrestling was at its highest. Maybe the quality of pro wrestling we don't see to the level that we do today with New Japan and various independents, but really at a pop culture level, wrestling was huge. It was everywhere. It was on magazine covers, TV guides. Kids that never liked wrestling were wearing wrestling T-shirts. It was the in thing. So we're going to take it back to the start and relive the Monday Night War. And we'll start off, which I think is a pretty good base point to do it, Simon, and that is King of the Ring 1996.
Yeah, when we were trying to pick a show to start with, we kind of figured out that the Attitude Era in some ways starts in 96 and it starts in June with the King of the Ring with the WWF, and on the other side, WCW with Bash at the Beach just a couple of weeks later with the formation of the NWO. So we're going to go through each of the major pay-per-views, break down that month, break down what was happening in the world of wrestling at that time, and try and relive the war, as we said, from our modern perspective, but especially from what we thought at the time. King of the Ring 96 is a video I rented so many times as a kid. So to watch this again as an adult, definitely had some different thoughts to then.
It's also another weird thing too, because I think the first time I saw it was also via VHS, and now literally we can do this entire series very easily because we don't have to run down to a Blockbuster or a Civic Video. It's all right there at the snap of the fingers with the WWE Network. So to actually boot it up and watch it gave me incredible nostalgia feels, but at the same time, boy, is it dated.
It is in some ways. There were some things I really liked about that time of WWF, and I think we can start with the intro. It starts off with the old WWF for over 50 years, the worldwide leader in sports entertainment. As a kid, I just thought that was cool, and I thought, oh my God, it's been around forever. But you do the maths as an adult, now that we have Google as well, the timeline doesn't work. They hadn't been around for 50 years.
I am also so glad you brought it, because one of the notes I've actually written down is the revolutionary force in sports entertainment.
That's right. Yeah. They had the different versions.
You are absolutely right, because it starts off with it's the block logo, which very much looks retro now, and the booming voice. It very much said, hey, we're wrestling, we've been wrestling forever. Any other wrestling doesn't count. It's just us.
We've done it for this long. Like, if you trace the history of the WWF, I was trying to do it today. It only goes back to maybe the 50s, like if you want to get technical with like Vince's dad owning Capital Wrestling. So 40 years is about it. But of course, with the WWF, they add about 20% to everything. So they're like, for over 50 years.
100%. And, you know, the other thing that really stood out to me when I watch it. And we're in the HD era now where we're seeing not unique pay-per-view sets, but we're used to the glitz and the glam. I don't know if you remember the old WWF Attitude game on PlayStation back in the day, Simon, where you could create a pay-per-view arena, and it was just like, have a banner here, and maybe what color ropes would you like? That's what the arena basically looked like. It just had it was WWF Attitude, create a wrestler arena. That's what it was.
Yeah, to be fair though,
plain.
I forgot that they had the big crown above the ring. That is the one production touch that you're like, okay, they did that, which is not something they normally do. They don't normally have just a bit of prop above the ring, but they had the big crown. So, and they had the guards at the entrance watching the door. And they come into play later on, though.
The real regal sort of both of them opening the door, like to let everything in. But the thing, too, that I really enjoyed about it was it just got straight to business. Like, the minute you kickstart that pay-per-view, just like, oh, we're live at the Mecca Stadium. Welcome, guys. Oh, here's Owen Hart. We're going to get straight into our first sets of matches. Like, yes, you had your video packages, but it was very much straight to the point. Okay, here's the show. Let's get it started.
Yeah, and the thing I loved about this intro too, that all of this this era of pay-per-views, every show should still open with Vince McMahon yelling, "Welcome, everyone." They should just pre-record that and play it at the start of every pay-per-view. That should roll after the little WWE, little intro thing. Just him saying, "Welcome, everyone," because that gets you hyped for a pay-per-view.
The other thing that really did too was, like, I love how it also took me back to how good of a character Owen Hart was, because when he marches down, he's got his slammy in hand and everything too. But and the indignation of Jim Ross and Vince McMahon that Owen would have the audacity to treat them the way that he did.
Yep.
And Vince's disgusted face just made that intro so perfect for us.
Yeah, and it is kind of sad because, like, there was so much talk of Owen wanting to retire really soon after he passed away. Like, he was always planning on retiring pretty young. I think he would have made an amazing commentator. Like, it's really weird with Owen Hart. I feel like he's better at commentary than he was at promos. Like, you watch this show, this is one of the best things he ever did as a character. He kills it, the whole show. I totally forgot. I didn't even realize, like, why isn't Lawler commentating? I didn't even care. Owen Hart filled that role amazingly.
Speaking of Lawler, he'll come into play a little bit later on, but let's actually get straight into some of these matches, because I don't know about you, man, but I said to you over a text that, like, there are some highlights and there are some lowlights, but you want to talk about a show starting off with the highlights, and the match between Steve Austin and Mark Merrow was a King of the Ring semi-final match to start off the show. It was a barn burner, but the thing that I noticed, and with the benefit of hindsight that makes it even more interesting to watch, is Austin always carried himself as a badass. He looked like a star. He didn't have the iconic music that we're all used to, but you knew that he was like the real deal.
Yeah, that boring music kills his entrance though, because when you're like, oh, an Austin match, and then it's just this like slow, methodical sort of music. He doesn't even have his full goatee yet. Like the mo and the chin isn't attached. So you're getting like this like half-formed Austin in every sense. He does the stunner, which they mentioned he only debuted on the previous Raw, but he doesn't even do the kick to the gut before the stunner. So it's all like half-baked Austin, but he's still pretty damn good. This match is really good.
It's very much an undercooked Austin. It's almost like, it's got the foundations of what we'd grow and love, but also at the same time, it's pre-neck surgery Austin, so he can still go. I think the match goes for about like goes for more than 15 minutes. It felt like more than 15 minutes at least.
As a kid, though, did you think Mark Merrow was really cool? Because I did. I thought the Wild Man was awesome.
And the fact that he had Sable with him too added to the fact, because I was always under the impression if a wrestler had a manager, they were a big deal. Whether it be Ric Flair with Mr. Perfect, Bobby Heenan with any of the family, if you had a manager there with you, you were a big deal. So, and especially with someone like Sable, like you couldn't have a big. Well, there was Sonny, and Sonny, of course, was a big part of that early Attitude Era as well. But Sable and Mark Merrow, as a side note too, Mark Merrow, actually did a pretty good job in this match, which is something that you don't often say about Mark Mero matches.
Yeah, I think a lot of people might talk trash about him without having actually watched him wrestle with the right guys and in the right setting. Man, he had good matches. And even if you take away the match being quote-unquote good, as an athlete, there's a sequence in this. He does a flip over the rope, then he does a suicide dive, then he does a Frankensteiner all in a row, like a top rope Frankensteiner. And it's just like, geez. Oh, and like a missile drop kick. Like, he was ahead of his time. He was the Ricochet of WWF 96.
That's a sentence I never thought would ever be said, but it's amazing too, because this is also one of those hindsight moments that I think we're going to look back into, because yes, even though we knew that Austin would go on to win the tournament, at the same time, you can tell if this was 96 WWF, I think more people thought that Mark Mero had a bigger portfolio rather than Austin would have. Like, they'd be like, oh yeah, put in Mero. He'll eat a loss, but we'll build him back up again and he'll be a star for generations to come. Austin's a good worker. He'll be able to do this, because Mero felt like the star here. Well, he felt like he was treated like the star, whereas Austin actually carried himself like one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like, Vince McMahon loses his mind on the entrance for Mark Mero and Sable. Yeah. You can really tell. Like, that's one of the things I love about Vince on commentary. He is obviously trying harder because he has a stake in all of this. Like, he really has to put over what he thinks is going to work. And he goes nuts for Mark Mero and Sable. And, yeah, it really feel like... At the time, I'm pretty sure as a kid, I would have expected Mark Mero to just walk all over Austin. I would have thought, Austin, that's that boring guy in black tights. But no, Austin just kept winning. Because
he does just look like, random player one. There's nothing about him. Mark Mero, as I said, he's got a manager, he's got a bit of gear, he's got a bit of flair, whereas you said, Austin doesn't have a full goatee.
Yeah, and Mark Mero did have a full goatee, so if that counts for anything, or he had a nice mow, it was very well groomed. It's very
But look, I thought that was a great match to start off. The crowd really got into it as well, but it really sort of set the tone, it got you amped for the pay-per-view.
Yeah.
Which is something that the next match really. Now I talk about highlights and lowlights. I don't know about you, man, but I couldn't get into the next match with Jake Roberts and Vader.
I couldn't either. I was just dreading it, thinking like, I'm pretty sure even as a kid I would have thought this sucked. One more note on the Austin match, though. The crowd started chanting for Sable a couple of minutes in. Another thing I'm sure Vince McMahon took notes on. But yeah, this next match, Vader, who was set up to be a monster, Jake the Snake is on his redemption story. Like, there's something there. But I couldn't get it out of my head that the commentary team kept saying, Jake the Snake making his comeback because he's old and he wants to see if he can make it. And they kept saying, he's 41. Like, that was so old.
Yeah, but then Owen sort of sitting there like, he's like 62 or things like that.
Which was great.
Yeah, it is funny that you mentioned like, he's so old, he's 41. How old's Randy Orton and AJ Styles at the moment? Like...
Randy Orton now is probably that age, and Randy Orton looks 20 years younger than Jake did 30 years ago, whatever this was. Yeah, like...
Oh, man.
And also, did you realize that Jake the Snake was that physically big? He stands in there with Vader, and he's like taller than him. And that you forget these weird things, because they're like, Vader is a big monster, and Jake is this sort of out-of-shape, lanky guy. But he was massive.
And it probably doesn't help, too, that, like, when you're even mid-carded WWF superstars back in the late 80s and early 90s are still bigger than most, like, WCW main eventers.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like, yeah, all of those just roided up dudes like Hercules and, Dino Bravo. They look like action figures.
Someone like, Savio Vega standing next to Mick Foley really shows off, like, one's an action figure and one's a guy.
Yeah. It was weird.
And that's no disrespect to Mick Foley there. It's just the way that it looked.
Just how it was. One note I've got here at the end of the match, I just wrote, shittiest DQ ever. Because Jake goes for the DDT and Vader just happens to hit the ref. Like, it didn't even look intentional. And the ref's like, oh my God, how dare you hit me? And just calls for a DQ. It's just,
Did this match, it's a blink and you miss it match. And that's basically all it deserved, really.
Yeah, thank God it's a quick one. It told a story, but honestly, nothing has changed of my point of view on the match. It's whatever. They then go backstage, though, to a Coliseum video exclusive, which I'm glad these are still intact on the network.
Yeah.
Because we all got these on the video, where they would show these pre-recorded segments that didn't air. And they had Jim Cornette, like, getting yelled at by Vader. But Jim Cornette is wearing a Marilyn Monroe tie that is just amazing. I just wanted to make note of that. Jim Cornette's outfits are insane.
I couldn't even remember Jim Cornette being paired with Vader. Like, was it a cup of coffee pairing? It was seriously just... That's why when the match starts, it's like, hang on a second, what's Jim Cornette doing out? Was Jim Cornette even in WWF this time? Like, my timeline just went all for a whack there, but it was just so bizarre.
Yeah, they just put Cornette with random guys. I think Vader ends up going with Paul Bearer maybe a couple of months later. I think Cornette is still with Vader at SummerSlam, but then after that, they switch gears.
Yeah, a very forgettable match, which unfortunately then rolls on into another forgettable match. It's the WWF Tag Team Championship match. The Smoking Guns versus the Godwins. Now, the Smoking Guns have Sonny and the Godwins have Hillbilly Jim. And people go and say that the Raw and SmackDown tag team divisions in the WWF, the WWE are pretty poor now. This is like scraping. You want to talk about scraping the barrel? This is when that first match graphic came up, I just like, are we actually going to do this match? Because it's not worth anything.
I hated everything about this, and I don't want to sound like, oh, I'm a smart wrestling fan from the year 2020. This was terrible. I don't ever remember being a fan of either team. But then what got me on commentary, they made note that the Smoking Guns were 3-time champions, and that's how bad the tag division was in this era. You're right. They were 3-time champs. They were looked at it like this legacy team, and, oh, man, it's just not good.
A side note too, Billy Gunn also does a fame-asser in the match. What was it called then? Because he's not Mr. Ass. He's well from being Mr. Ass.
Surely it was just called a rocker dropper, but even then, that feels like it's not right. Because
yeah, it doesn't.
Why would that be his name for it?
But when I saw that, and it wasn't a finish or anything. I think it only got a 2 count.
Yeah,
but when you saw it, was it because it's weird. It's sort of like when you put new creator wrestler moves onto all. It's like, if you put Randy Savage doing in say WWF All Stars and you give him the finishing move of Go to Sleep. That's what it felt like for me, because we're just like, hang on a second. Yes, it's Billy Gunn's move, but we're still a couple more. Well, we've got like one more sort of Olympic Games if we actually debut it as your finisher.
Yeah, but that's the great thing about like a character change. He did the move and it didn't matter, but then years later when he was Mr. Arse and the move was the Fame Arser, you're like, yeah, of course. But yeah, it is weird. He must have been doing it the whole time and no one cared, because no one cared about the Smoking Guns.
No one cared about this match as well. It was just, it was just poor. Really, really poor.
To make it weirder, like Sonny, they kept referencing that, she left the Body Donners and they've got a new manager and it's a guy in drag calling himself Cloudy instead of Sonny. Mm-hmm. That was so important, and this match was so bad that they went picture in picture to a promo from Cloudy during the match. I was like, God, I didn't remember the Cloudy stuff at all, to be honest. I don't remember that happening.
No, I think there's a part of your mind where you just sort of shelve away all that really bad pre-Austin 316 WWF stuff. The Goons in there as well as some other stuff too. But there wasn't too much highlights from that tag match. But afterwards, though, we did get another great little video package. And Doc Hendricks, I forgot, was such a huge part of almost the Renee Young of WWF 96.
I did love, like, as a kid, I loved Doc Hendricks. Like, me and my brother thought he was cool, but we didn't know who Michael Hayes was. We didn't know he used to be a wrestler. We just thought he was this, like, over-the-top guy who was a douchebag, and he was great. He was awesome as just a promo guy.
It's these little things, those little transition pieces that you just don't get as much as he used to. But at least back then they kind of kept it. Now it just sort of seems like a really weird sort of piece to camera, whereas back then they sort of drove storylines a little bit more. You know, you had the doubts about the main event, you know, foreshadowing, things like that. But yeah, it also made me remember Bulldog as not like no one ever thought that he was going to be a main eventer, and every time he's in a WWF title match, was there anyone out there that actually thought that he would win the match?
I wanted him to win. Like, Shawn Michaels is my childhood hero, basically. But I feel like I remember as a kid, I was like, how come Bulldog never wins these matches? Because you're right, he had been in a few, and you're always like, well, he never wins them. And
he never wins them.
Never did.
It's like at King of the Ring 1993, Razor Ramon gets his only WWF title shot, doesn't win, never gets one again. So he's almost got that stamp where it's just like, all right, I guess you're just one of those guys. But,
hey, you tried once and it's all over. That was it. What about, I think you would have liked this, the shot of the Sega Saturn blimp in the arena that they came back from after this.
Nothing says. First off, that also puts you in the state of where the WWF was in terms of the war, because Sega as a company was on their last leg. So for the WWF to go and hitch a ride on that blimp just says everything.
Yeah, and hey, people thought WWF was going to go the way of Sega, but they made a comeback in a few years. So, you know, But yeah, at the time, that was like a bad omen.
Really was, and it just leads into more bad omens because we roll on into the Ultimate Warrior versus Jerry Lawler. I said to you, I can't remember. I think I said this to you before when we were talking, Simon. Warrior was put into the John Cena role here because it's 96. Hogan's gone. We need someone to carry us into this fight against this new upstart promotion that's making a little bit of waves. Warrior looked to be the guy that they've planted their flag in, and unfortunately, this was probably the most entertaining part about this match was Jerry Lawler at the beginning.
My God, his promo is absolutely problematic by today's standards. And like the WWF prior to this never had anyone cut a promo like this through the Hogan era or through the Brett era. So you can tell the reins are being loosened. They're letting guys go a little bit. Jerry Lawler's promo is brutal. He talks the whole entrance and just picks people out of the crowd and just drills them. Like, I made note on a few of these jokes. I'm not going to say them, but I'm just going to give you some of the reference points that Jerry Lawler makes. He makes fun of a woman's weight. He claims that a young girl is a prostitute. He claims that a young girl is so ugly that men would turn gay because of her. He claims a guy has sex with animals. None of this would be okay. And he's just killing them. He's walking up right to their face and saying this to fans. One girl, I forget which one that he made fun of, straight up says to him, and it's not even censored, when he says it, she's just like, fuck you. It's just, yeah, it's wild. It's a hell of a promo.
It is. And it also goes to show you why people, I guess, regard Jerry Lawler's promos like and that old school Memphis kind of mentality, because it's almost like you said, this could never be done today, and you could probably argue it should never have been done back then either.
I know.
But in comparison to that, the Ultimate Warrior's entrance is basically everything that is wrong with the Ultimate Warrior. All of the dressings, all of everything that you could throw into it, all the pomp and circumstance for very little payoff.
But how good was the pyro? I forgot he had so much in this era. He had pyro at the entrance. Then he had the like pyro Warrior logo.
The Warrior logo, yeah.
And then he had the shoot off pyro in the ring with it. And I was like, they just gave him all the pyro, but the crowd loved it.
Yeah. But it's such a, and I did love the fact that Jerry Lawler, even against someone like the Warrior's probably trying to catch his breath here, but Jerry Lawler still attacks him during the entrance with the scepter.
Yeah, he just goes for it. It's not a long match, but you can tell Lawler was just like, fuck it. I'm just going to make him work for it and just get him right at the start. He even hits him with a pile driver.
A pile driver, yeah. There's a pile driver there, but Warrior does the Triple H pedigree sell where it's just like straight up.
straight up makes his comeback and wins after a pile driver. But to be fair, the crowd is more into Warrior winning this match than anything on the show so far.
And you could see what with a guy like Warrior. I mean, we talked about the entrance. We talked about how he just was invincible. He's like a superhero here. And the crowd reaction is something else too. And if you're Vince McMahon, you have to lead your company into the new generation against WCW, and you want the posters, you want billboards and things like that. I can see why Warrior would be the guy that you'd maybe put that flag on.
Yeah, and that's what's interesting about watching this back. You're right, because at the time, if you're Vince McMahon and you're hearing that reaction, you are going to think, well, I'm just going to hitch the wagon to Warrior again. He's going to get us out of this. We're going to make the comeback because of him. For a million reasons, the Warrior never worked out. But yeah, you can almost see why they were doing this, because he was over, like at the time. And as a kid, Warrior was a big deal.
And you'd argue too that like he has transcended. He's almost on that same plateau as a Hulk Hogan is, because when you talk about, even today, when you talk about wrestling to fans, they always mention, like, oh, does Hulk Hogan still do it? Does Randy Savage still do it? What about the Ultimate Warrior? I loved him as a kid. Da da da. These are the guys that were larger than life, so you could sort of see why he was given the big pomp and circumstance entrance. And if we could wind back a little bit, look at his entrance and the way that he's presented compared to Austin. And they are both drastically different, yet we've seen with the benefit of hindsight and how history played out, how much of an influence on the WWF getting to such a mainstream pop culture phenomenon Austin was, with his bare minimum sort of dressing and sprucing up, whereas Warrior just dissolved and reappeared in 98 back in WCW.
Yeah, like, to be fair, surely at the end of this, when they're, breaking the show down in the office, they're thinking, man, did you hear the ovation for Warrior? Man, did you see them lose their mind? Oh, what about Austin? Yeah, he did good. It was a decent match, good promo.
It was good. Yeah.
There would have been nothing more than that. In hindsight, everyone's an expert, but watching this show back, there is no way you can predict what ends up happening, because isolated, you're like, oh yeah, Warrior is pretty much their big star, like the biggest.
Speaking of big stars, another one of you'd argue the biggest star that the WWF has ever produced, The Undertaker taking on Mankind. I forgot how good the first incarnation of Mankind was. Long before Have a Nice Day, the sadistic sort of, I was going to say gothic, but that doesn't really work for it. Brooding sort of Mankind, fitting together with The Undertaker. This was a hell of a match, and it really got the show back on track, I thought.
Yeah, I recommend this. This one's absolutely worth watching again. It's the first match of their rivalry, which went for years. It brings out a different side of The Undertaker as a wrestler. Like, I was always a fan of The Undertaker as a kid, but I remember this feud with Mankind felt different even back then, especially as we go through the months and get to Buried Alive and get to their match at Survivor Series. It felt like The Undertaker was fighting from behind against his equal. It wasn't, him fighting a fat guy like Yokozuna, or him fighting a really tall guy like Gonzalez. As a kid, you're like, he'll beat them because he's, magic. Mankind made him fight.
And because you've like you said, he was going up against guys like Kamala or, all of these non-issues. I'll put them in the Bulldog category. That they never really sort of had a threat to him. But and the other thing I enjoyed about this too was there was such a huge emphasis on the mandible claw and just how bad it was. It was put on the same pedestal as the Tombstone was. This is the thing that could just snap Undertaker if Mankind wanted to.
Yeah, and the Undertaker has to try different things. The Undertaker does a sneak attack. I thought that was weird because Mankind was such a threat. He appeared on the top rope and just started with this massive flying clothesline. But
were you shocked at the amount of chair use and weapons there were?
That's what I was about to say. Watching this from a modern standpoint, you'd be shocked at how much brawling they do and chair spots and how hardcore it gets at times. Like, man, it's really, really good.
And we're talking like just complete straight to the head too. So, which is so strange to watch, especially with 2020 eyes and with the stuff that we know about how both of these men, their careers have ended up. Like Mick Foley now, like touch wood, both these guys are still in relatively good health, but it's matches like this that contribute to them being so frail that they are now.
Yeah, well, one note about the commentary as well, speaking of them, physically, JR says this about Foley. He's like, oh, he's got that mutilated ear. His arms are all scarred up. One leg is shorter than the other. What the hell does that mean? Why is one leg shorter than the other? He never explained it.
It is bizarre, absolutely bizarre. But Mankind getting the win. You mentioned a little bit earlier how this placed Mankind on the same level as Undertaker, and him actually getting that win. And not only that too, I reckon there was a different fire in this Undertaker than you saw in like previous ones against Gonzalez and stuff like that. Taker had his work boots on, and so did Foley, and they were desperate to, I reckon, have like the show stealer of this card. And I actually say it's unfortunate that this happened on the pay-per-view that Austin 316 was born, because if that wasn't, I reckon that'll be the match that everyone's talking about this pay-per-view, or the thing that people will be talking about.
Yeah, I like the main event the most as a match, but you're right. This felt huge, Taker and Mankind. And it's planted the seeds for Paul Bearer turning on The Undertaker, which you never thought would have happened at the time. The commentators were like, oh, it was an accident. Of course he didn't mean it. And you took their word for it. You thought Owen Hart was wrong because Owen was like, he did it on purpose, McMahon. And you're like, nah, shut up, Owen. But yeah, it was a nice bit of foreshadowing there.
So, as a complete side note, we mentioned earlier, there's a lot of things that in 1996 are questionable, and in 2020 are definitely no-go zones. Ahmed Johnson versus Goldust, with Terry Runnels as Marlena as well. Goldust in 96 is almost like he's treated like the coronavirus a little bit. Like, there's just so much like. This era really portrayed him as like some kind of leper, doesn't it? Because like, he's so bad because he's so different.
Yeah, this is why some people argue that Goldust started the Attitude Era, because not only is this feud totally messed up, but they had already done it a year prior with Razor Ramon. It's essentially the same thing. What if I, hit on this ultra masculine guy? I'll fill him with rage because I'm a man and I'm attracted to him. Like, that's the crux of the story.
And feeding into that too, with just like, I'm going to give another man mouth to mouth. Ooh, look how bad I am.
Vince McMahon says when that bit is replayed, that's the most disgusting thing I've ever seen in my life. Now, I know he's being creepy and being a sexual predator, but he could argue, hey, man, he's just giving him mouth to mouth.
He's just giving him mouth to mouth. Like, he's helping out. He's helping out, brother.
I love how Ahmed Johnson is woken by being kissed. Like in the segment from Raw and in the match, if you kiss Ahmed Johnson and you're a guy, he will perk right up and just beat the shit out of everyone.
But like the things that Goldust does, it's going just. He's really he's prodding every single one of Ahmed Johnson's buttons. There's the rubbing, the licking, all of it. It's just, and it sounds so bizarre to say in a context that anyone doesn't know the character Goldust.
I've heard them try to defend it and say, oh no, but we're trying to say that it's mind games. And it's like, you're also playing on the fact that gay men are sexual predators. And they're going to touch every man they can.
Yeah, it's like...
I was going to say, the line, I think Owen says, like, offhanded, but he just throws it in there. He's like, oh, I know Goldust. There's not a man that Goldust doesn't like, or something like that. Just, they make him out to be a creep.
It really plays too much into it. You forget too, Ahmed Johnson is someone who I think later on we'll be discussing in a bit more in depth, because this is sort of the start of his rise. And you forget too how much of a popular dude Ahmed Johnson grew to become as well. Like him deciding not to be part of the nation is another huge moment. But
I loved Ahmed
reckon,
Johnson. This match as a kid, I couldn't believe that he won the Intercontinental title. I was so happy.
But yeah, this is actually one of those matches where if you put Dustin Rhodes, versus Ahmed Johnson, strip back all of the character traits and stuff like that, I don't know if you have a good enough match though. Like,
yeah,
a lot of the attention of this match is due to the theatrics and the actions and playing on the what's the word? You know, the
gay
fears
panic.
and the fear and the fear mongering of that era, which is what made Goldust such a good character back then. But like, strip the gimmick away, and it's not that good of a match.
No, it's got some bright spots, but they do go back to just slowing it down so much. Ahmed Johnson opens like a house of fire. I thought maybe this was going to be a match like, oh, maybe I forgot it's like a hidden gem. Ahmed starts it with a side of the ring to the other side suicide dive over the ropes. And I was like, my God, that's crazy because he's this giant guy. But yeah, aside from that, it just slows right down and it's just rubbing and kissing and mouth to mouth, and that fuels Ahmed's comeback. It's just, it's weird.
It got me also thinking too, do you reckon that the entire reason Ahmed won this match is because they wanted to put Goldust's head in between his legs for the Pearl River plunge? Like, that's the only, like, they started off with that. Like, oh, it'll be so disgusting.
Yeah, and that was it.
And then we'll work our way backwards from there.
Yeah. Well, man, that's a cool move, though, if we're talking about the Pearl River plunge. Like, yeah. But, I don't know. Ahmed might not have been too grossed out because he had those thigh pads on, you know, to protect his legs. Oh, my God. Maybe that's why he wore them. I never understood why Ahmed wore the thigh pads. It's because he didn't want Goldust's head down there because he's that insecure.
He's that insecure about it. But speaking of Ahmed Johnson, were you shocked at the celebration with all the jobbers?
That was weird. That was a Coliseum exclusive where he goes backstage and all the Savio and the Bushwhackers are all pouring champagne on Ahmed Johnson. It's kind of good to see. I wish they would do that more now, though, just to show that all of these guys are mates, you know?
Yeah. One of and we'll probably touch on this in a couple of later episodes, but one of the coolest sights that I can remember from back in the day was when Lex Luger won the WCW title from Hulk Hogan, and everyone was so happy that the belt was back in WCW that, you know, they're all flood the ring, and you're right, it's little moments like this that we forget, where like Angle at Unforgiven 2001, where everyone floods the ring. Bret Hart, WrestleMania 10, and they all hoist the champion. I think it's just weird that it happened to Ahmed Johnson.
As a Coliseum exclusive. It wasn't on the pay-per-view. So he got a moment, but not really. Also, about that segment, I forgot the Bushwhackers were back in 96 as well. So that was Vince McMahon bringing back Warrior, bringing back the Bushwhackers, just, taking it back.
Just let's just see what can work. Let's just see what can work. But something else that popped up that I didn't realize was so early in the timeline. Brian Pillman. Yeah,
shows up first appearance in the WWF. He's got his boot on, you know, because he ruined his leg in a car wreck, but they still let him come out and cut a promo. Cuts a really good promo. As a kid, I didn't know who he was.
Same here. I had no. And in hindsight, when you know about, you know, Brian Pillman, I didn't realize that it was 96 that he sort of made his mark. Like, I remember him in the Hart Foundation. Like, it's Hart. Like, when I think back of memories of Brian Pillman in the WWF, it's always Hart Foundation Brian Pillman, not this Brian Pillman.
Yeah, and that's why it was interesting to start with this pay-per-view, because the seeds are there this early. I know they don't really play with this timeline, but Pillman's here. And they make reference to him and Austin being a former tag team. They walk past each other and give each other a look. And like, even the wording he uses, he said he's going to rape, pillage, and plunder the Federation. And he talks about, I don't know.
It's very much like it fits the narrative of what we know about Brian Pillman now, but you can sort of see, like, if you were, like, back in 1996 watching that on pay-per-view with your family, someone's like, what did he just say he's going to do? Who is this man, kind of thing. So, yeah, it was kind of interesting. It was a weird little footnote because it's sort of, like you said, when you watch it in hindsight, go, oh, that's right, Pillman's here. But as you move towards the King of the Ring finals, Steve Austin defeating Jake Roberts, and you got to say that Austin pretty much did all of his wrestling in that first King of the Ring match, don't you?
Yeah, this match was absolutely nothing to write home about. It is not very good, but we all know it for the ending, with the promo.
Again, with the mentions to Jake's age, like...
Yeah. Oh, yeah, they go on that again.
It's all like, it's like Jake is just, he's grown back both legs, and look at the big heart of the guy. Oh, he's back at 41 to try and redeem himself. It's just like, oh my God.
Every 41-year-old I know is in better shape than Jake the Snake is on this show. Like, it shouldn't be that much of a big deal.
No, it really wasn't much of a match, though, was it?
No, and he just... Austin just suddenly wins at some point. He just hits him with the stunner. He's like, all right, match is over. Again, no kick. It's really weird watching him do the stunner without the setup. But yeah, Austin wins, goes back, cuts the promo. What did you think of the promo, watching it back in full in the context of the pay-per-view?
Austin has, from day dot, known the character. Like... that is the same DTA Austin. That's the same one that another defining Austin moment for me is the one on that episode of Raw where he saves Stephanie from the Black Wedding with the Undertaker.
Yep.
And the whole time that he's doing it and absolutely demolishing the ministry, Jim Ross keeps saying, he didn't do it because he loves for the love of McMahon. He did it because it's the right thing. And, his character has always been look out for himself first. And this is where we sort of see the birth of this because, well, we don't see the birth of it. We knew it already. But, like, when you see that raw emotion that he gives out, because clearly it's not scripted. He's saying it off the cuff. But Austin has the reason that he's become the star that he is because he's known what he was meant to be from day dot. He said that in those promos in ECW. He knew the star that he was going to be, and this right there is the rubber stamp that said, "Yep," and there I go.
Yeah, and in the promo when he drops the 316 line, Doc Hendricks even reacts to it when he said 316 just kicked your ass. Like, he looks back and they look at the crowd, and the crowd did sort of cheer for it. There was an audible reaction with like, what? What was that?
Yeah, but I reckon until those Austin 316 signs come out, it'd be like I don't think in that moment everyone knew just how much it was going to be. It was just kind of like, oh, gee, he's gone and said that. Like, yeah. Like, oh, well, we'll forget about it by Monday and maybe we'll try to push it. But just the fact that off-the-cuff line started such a huge phenomenon. It's just amazing.
Yeah, because he actually ends the promo by saying, and that's the bottom line, because Stone Cold said so. He puts more emphasis on that. He might have thought that was going to be the catchphrase.
Yeah. Because it's by no means is Austin 316 a throwaway line. They don't treat it like a throwaway line. But at the same time, it's the signature rather than the finisher, if you will.
Yeah, and to be honest, he never really references it again. He might have mentioned it here and there, but it's not an ongoing catchphrase. It was just a thing he said that people caught on to and eventually changed everything. Because he also said in his promo, whoever wins this main event, I'm coming for the title and I'm going to be WWF champ. He doesn't get a title shot.
No. And it's a long time before he does. In fact, he moves on to the Intercontinental field from here after this. So it's ages away before he even gets a title shot. He's not even in... I don't reckon he's even in... if they're drawing up a whiteboard list of people, who's going to take on, Shawn Michaels in the next year or so, he's nowhere near there, I reckon.
He doesn't get... I'm just off the top of my head. He doesn't get a title match for a whole year. He wrestles The Undertaker at Cold Day in Hell. And that's in 97.
Yeah.
And this is June 96. Yeah,
and this is June 96. So they had no idea there. But hey, lightning in a bottle, and as they say, a star is born.
Yep. The main event up next, Bulldog versus Shawn. I remember loving this match as a kid. I think this still holds up.
I actually reckon it still does too, because there's a lot of emotion there. That I know it might seem like I was a little bit harsh on the British Bulldog, putting in the category of never to be a champion. But the one thing that his matches always had were like a lot of emotion. They were always emotionally charged. Be it the Wembley match against Brett at SummerSlam, but like the fact that his wife's there as well. Why on earth, I wonder if Jim Cornette got paid twice for this pay-per-view, because he's just really spreading his wares once here. But just the mere fact that, like I said to you before, as a kid, when I had managers involved, it always made a big match. It always made me feel like it was a much bigger deal. Shawn Michaels is there with a manager. British Bulldog's there with an entourage. It had a big match feel, and it went the distance too. Like, you're right. It's a really good match.
Yeah, Shawn's matches with Bulldog don't really get spoken about in high regard as his matches, with Brett or Undertaker or whoever else. Him and Bulldog had amazing chemistry, though. You could argue this match is as good as any match Bulldog had with Brett, just wasn't on as big of a stage. Yeah,
and another thing, and the other big match feel that added to it, obviously, is having Earl Hebner there as well.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Perfect as in being involved is there's just so many additions to this match that did give it that big match feel for essentially when you talk about the staple pay-per-views, King of the Ring is 5th on the totem pole.
Yeah.
It's the lowest of all of it's above In Your House, but it's the lowest of the staples. But the other thing that was really great about this match too is Owen Hart on commentary, because I don't know how much of that is just is a bit of Owen and bit of the Hart family championing coming out, because he just runs down Michaels so much in this match.
Yeah, and he's just totally pro Bulldog. They were a team at the time, and they're both part of Camp Cornette, and it's just everything is stacked against Shawn Michaels. You've got, like you said, Mr. Perfect as well. And who does Shawn have? Like, Bulldog's got his wife, his brother-in-law, his manager, his dodgy mate as one of the special refs, and Shawn's just got Jose Lothario, who as a kid I didn't understand the context. I'm like, I guess he trained him.
Right now.
It's funny, you watch it now though. This is the opposite. You watch it as an adult and you pick out how little Shawn cared to have Jose there. Like, he does his entrance and doesn't pay attention to him. He never interacts with him. Like, he doesn't want him there, but he just went along with it.
Another good thing about this match too is, like, obviously Bulldog is incredibly, he's a much more dominating specimen compared to HBK, and HBK's got his bumping shoes on here. And when HBK goes in the ring with like a power wrestler like Bulldog, it's not ragdolling by any means, but when Bulldog does press slams and stuff like that, you can feel it at home.
Yeah. And I think that's why it works with Bulldog and Shawn, because Bulldog is a power wrestler, but he's also very quick. He can sort of do the technical stuff. And then, like you said, Shawn just bumps his ass off and can do, pretty much. He's doing
Hurricane Runners, things like that. Like, and that sort of stuff's been countered by power bombs, and like HBK's doing his best to try and run the big guy off his feet. And the big guy is trying, and Bulldog is using, brute power. That's what I got to do to put him away.
Yeah, it's excellent. It ends and sort of falls apart with all the interferences. But, man, in terms of, like, the crowd loving it, they're not fussed about a dodgy finish. They're not fussed about, two referees and all this interference. Man, they lose it for this brawl that involves Owen and then Vader and then Ahmed Johnson, and then the Ultimate Warrior gets the pop of the night for that interference at the end of the show. It's wild.
It's shenanigans, just full stop. But, Bulldog really did step up. Like, that's the thing. Like, even though you knew that he'd never have a chance to win that title, he brings his A game.
Absolutely. And it's really weird that, Yeah, you wouldn't really get another shot after this
No.
in a main event. I think like a random in 99 on that weird comeback he made, but never a shot like this.
And that's the thing too. Like he's to use a phrase from modern day WWE, he's a B+ player kind of thing.
He absolutely is. But then on the other hand, if Bulldog was around in 2020, he probably would be WWE champion. It feels like they give more guys a shot now. And for as much as we say, oh, they're burying this guy, why don't they push this guy? They push a lot more people now than they did back then. You look at this card, you would assume most of these guys were world champion, but a lot of them weren't.
Yeah, like going into it, Mark Mero, he'll definitely get a run with the WWF title at some point in time. Ahmed Johnson. Sure, he's got championship material written on him, but I mean, he's an IC champion. But look, it's at this point in time too. You got to say, Shawn Michaels is also at his purple patch as well, because like I think this is his string of really good pay-per-view matches.
Yeah, 96 Shawn Michaels is untouchable. Yeah. You can say what you want about like, the ratings or WCW was winning. If you just take his main events through all of 96. With a variety of different opponents, Shawn Michaels is the best.
So when we look back at King of the Ring 1996, which is kind of fitting to do so because we're recording this on June 23rd, which is the date of King of the Ring 1996. When you saw this as a kid back then, were you satisfied with that pay-per-view?
Yeah, absolutely.
I sure as hell was. But it wasn't for like the Austin 316 moments and stuff like that. It was for the Bulldog match. It was for seeing the Ultimate Warrior, and it was definitely for the Undertaker versus Mankind. I don't think 96 Nims gave two hoots about Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Yeah, and I'll agree. Like as a kid, I rented this because it was a rematch from Beware of Dog with Bulldog and Shawn, and I wanted to see it. And yeah, like King of the Ring, the tournament as a kid. You're like, oh yeah, cool, the King of the Ring.
Oh yeah, someone gets a crown at the end, whatever.
I really didn't care that Austin won, as a kid. And Ultimate Warrior was a draw. I remember his picture was on the WrestleMania 12 video. And we were like, holy shit, like, oh my God, the Ultimate Warrior's back. So the fact that he was in this match as well with Jerry Lawler, that was a draw. And as I said, Ahmed Johnson having an Intercontinental title match, I loved Ahmed Johnson as a kid. Like, didn't think twice about Austin, but that is the moment from the pay-per-view we all tell ourselves we remember in
we were all there. Like, I remember it's on the Coliseum over here. I knew it at that moment he was going to be a star. But it's really strange. But like with the benefit of hindsight, when you actually see the names that are on this card, it's kind of hard because you can't sort of. This pay-per-view is always going to be an infamous one. Like, unfortunately, Austin 316 is just such a moment that affected the wrestling business as a whole that it will never be overshadowed. No matter how good the WWF Championship match was, no matter how good Warrior was, his reception was, no matter, it was all pales in comparison to the fact that this is the pay-per-view that Austin 316 was born.
Yeah, that's what most people will remember. But it's saying that now that we've watched it again, I would recommend this. I would say that people should watch it back for its nostalgia, for its, planting of the seeds of the Attitude Era, and for a few good matches that nobody remembers.
Well, that's exactly the thing. If you take out the King of the Ring matches and the tag match, you've got a pretty solid pay-per-view there.
Yeah, like the scary voiceover guy at the start said, the greatest lineup in King of the Ring history or whatever. He says, it's the biggest card, and they ran through all the big matches. It's pretty good. It's really, it's entertaining.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's just that this paper will always be in the shadow, and a great shadow of the Austin 316 speech. Completely going back to 96 Simon here, who did you think was the MVP of the pay-per-view?
For 96 Simon, Shawn Michaels. I could have given you that answer every month of 96. Like, Shawn Michaels 96, don't know why, he was my favorite wrestler ever. And still is. I think 96 Shawn Michaels is the shit.
I'd have to say, for me, it was Undertaker, because Undertaker still had because he was the one that, he scared you as a kid, but you've known him for that long. And he was still kind of from that old era of a supernatural. He's a wrestling zombie kind of thing. So it's funny how both of us still completely ignore Austin in this pay-per-view, which is just phenomenal. But
all right. What about through 2020 eyes? Watching it back, who is the standout performer of the show? Is it Austin?
This is going to sound really, really smarkish, but the 2020 eyes says that the person that the MVP of this night is Shawn Michaels. Because if you notice, from the start of the pay-per-view to the end, it all flows. It's got nothing to do with the King of the Ring tournament. It's all about building to that WWF title match. And that's the main story about this. It's got nothing to do with the tournament. The whole pay-per-view just happens to be building towards this title match. It's like if this was a fully loaded or something, that's what they'd be building to. It's just the fact that King of the Ring is there that, oh, by the way, there's a tournament that's also the namesake of this pay-per-view. But really, this is a Shawn Michaels pay-per-view.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, like for me, like I said, Shawn Michaels' favorite wrestler. But watching this back, I got to say the Ultimate Warrior was the standout. Just for those ovations he got. Like, it blew my mind, and thinking in hindsight, like, oh, okay, it's totally understandable. You can't call Vince McMahon crazy in 96 for wanting to push the Warrior. This is a card filled with his absolute best in-ring guys, like Bulldog, Shawn, Owen, Mankind, Taker, Austin. They're all there. Warrior is the guy who gets the biggest reaction, and you can't say, oh, it's just because of his entrance. He comes back at the end of the show, and he's just as popular. Yeah. They've already seen him. So, I don't know. It was weird.
It's also an interesting pay-per-view to kickstart the Reliving the War series, because let's look at the players that we just mentioned there if we're going to our MVPs. Austin, Warrior, HBK. Like these guys, and Taker and Mankind. These are guys that we will continue to be repeating in more watchings of pay-per-views, because at some point in time, these combination of guys, maybe not Warrior because he'll appear later on, but those four of Austin, Michaels, Taker, and Mankind all intertwine at some point in time in various different strands throughout the next couple of years.
Absolutely, and they all end up being like the building blocks of the Attitude Era and take WWF to places it never was. The one guy who's missing from this show is Bret Hart. And while he ends up having more of an impact later, you almost think, okay, well, he's not on this show, and did it even matter in hindsight?
In fact, until you mentioned it, it was a complete non-issue.
With Bret out of the picture, let's say Bret did retire in 96, when he went to make that Cowboy show or whatever. I think Owen Hart would have been a bigger star. Owen Hart is a huge part of this show. And Bret isn't there to sort of be tied to him as a character.
And Owen's also, Owen doesn't wrestle at all in this. The only bit of physicality he gets involved is with Mr. Perfect at the end. But you're right. I don't know if he'll be as big of a star, because he'll still always have the tag of Bret's younger brother. That's the only thing that'll stop him.
I think he would have done more though. He would
have shook it off.
When he's his own character, it really feels like he's different. But then they end up tying him back to Bret with the Hart Foundation, which is great too. I'm excited to get into 97 because totally underrated year for the WWF.
Yeah, but look, I think it's a resounding thumbs up for King of the Ring 96. Do yourself a favor and check it out. In the next edition of Reliving the War, we are going to look at the next WCW pay-per-view that is on the horizon, which is Bash at the Beach 1996. Could you imagine after this pay-per-view, Vince and Bruce Pritchard and obviously all the WWF guys just like, that was a pretty good pay-per-view, guys, Let's see what those hiccups down south have got to deal with this one. What do they got planned next? Oh, their little beach fight. Yeah, don't worry. Yeah, we'll be right. It's all good.
Yeah, they can have Hall and Nash, and Hogan's washed up, so who cares?
Yeah, I can't wait to see what they bring in July. That'll be fun. Simon, this has been absolutely fantastic, man, and I've really enjoyed going back and watching the pay-per-view. I actually cannot wait to go back and rewatch Bash of the Beach 1996, because right now I can't remember a thing about it.
Yeah, well, we saw the birth of Austin 316, and aside from the birth of the New World Organization of Wrestling, brother, I can't remember anything about Bash at the Beach either, so that'll be good.
Yeah, so we will check out, that will be our next episode, Reliving the War. Make sure you check it out. We've still got the Wide World of Wrestling Facebook page up and running too?
Yeah, we'll post this show there, keep track of it there for now, and join us on this journey.
100%. Remember, you can follow me, Nims, on Twitter at Doc Nims, and you can also follow Simon on his Twitter account at Simon Takla. Make sure you check out the Wide World of Wrestling Twitter page as well. There's great stuff up there, and Facebook as well. But thanks for joining us on the first edition of Reliving the War. We'll catch you next time with Bash at the Beach 1996.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.